It was like, I'm not interested in this at all. I know what computers are. I read science fiction. I think if there was more transparency in scientific literature, if people were required to cite the science fiction influence on there when they were doing research, we would discover the incredible role that science fiction has played in directing people's own research. And travel actually helped part of that. I understood that time was more valuable than money. And so there was this sort of shift in understanding that time wealth was much more valuable than money wealth. There's a lot of nuance. I would say Out of Control was fairly nuanced because it was not binary. I think there's very, very few things in the world that are binary. Most are continuums, and that's part of the whole message that there's a continuum between the most biological thing and the most mechanical thing, that they're actually just one long, tenuous thing that have different faces. And it doesn't make any sense, but that's what it is. It's kind of like superpositions. God's a superposition, right? It's God, not God at the same time. I write in order to find out what I think. A lot of people's creativity and tremendous work and innovation and discovery and good stuff comes from the fact that they noticed something and decided that rather than it being unimportant, that it was very, very important. I mean, that is one of Stewart's great strengths. He had a good nose for a frontier that was potent. He was always there at the front. But we both did. Like, we were very early Burning Man attendees. I was one among the first. My kids were the first kids at Burning Man. When the internet came along, I decided that I wanted to report on it as if it was a new country, as if I was a travel writer and this was a new country. So I talked my way into the editors at Horth to give me access to the new experimental online systems that they were meeting on. And that also just elevated, because it wasn't just a bulletin board, it was the bulletin board with threads, and you could be on this all at the same time. And that was like, oh, wow. And so this was a new country. So I was writing the stuff about this was a new continent. And again, the informational aspect of it, of finding, and this was the whole Earth catalog agenda that I was on, of like trying to provide information that was hard to find, that you couldn't find anywhere else, being available in that kind of a way, of that having access to it. That's also very human, because you have someone who's looking how to do something and you help them do it. That's a very human emotion, a human quality of helping people accomplish things. There's a conceptual idea of landscapes that is really popular in computer science and biology, which is this landscape is a way of mapping the path, the process of an organization or an organism or an individual. And the idea that the higher it goes, the more perfected, more optimized it is. And if you're designing something, you want to kind of optimize it. And there are algorithms and methods to kind of make sure you're always climbing the hill, where you are actually going up the gradients all the time, trying to optimize something. And the issue is that when you get to the peak may be a local optima. There may be higher peaks, more optimization on a different peak. But to get there, you have to kind of go back down. And that's really hard if you have an organization built for excellence and optimization, to go back down to where it's less optimal. But the important thing is that to have the greatest effect on the world, you don't want to be hill climbing, you want to be hill making. You want to make a new territory. You want to create the new continent. You want to make the new mountain that can be hill climbed. And so this idea of hill making versus hill climbing is where I think the greatest rewards are. Rather than trying to optimize what we already have, you want to be on the frontier and making a new territory.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Love and Philosophy. I'm so glad you're here. Today, I'm talking with Kevin Kelly. You probably know him as the founding executive editor of Wired magazine, or if you're a fan of the Whole Earth Review and Stewart brand, you know him from that because he was an early editor and publisher. Tim Ferriss also called him the most interesting man in the world, and he just might be. He's been doing a blog since before there were really even blogs, at least 20 years. He's the author of this sort of cult favorite essay, 1000 True Fans. He co-founded the Hacker Conference, which is still going on. He's ridden his bike across America at least twice. He helped with the movie Minority Report. I could go on and on. Oh, he was among the first to find Lonely Planet, and I think he was even the first to import it. And he was part of the Co-Evolution Quarterly with people like Wendell Berry and Gregory Bateson, John Todd, Danilo Meadows. I think he wrote the second, if not the first, book about complexity, which is from 1992. It's called Out of Control. He is already talking about cryptocurrency, if you can believe it, because he attended one of the first ever complexity conferences at Los Alamos, put on by, guess who? The Santa Fe Institute. I mean, really, this man, he seems to have been at the beginnings of just about everything, along with Stewart Brand. Both of them are just fascinating people to me, and just before I had this conversation, two things happened. I was with a friend at a museum in Amsterdam, and I happened to see the whole Earth catalog there, which is just beautiful. It's a huge book with the Earth on the cover. It's very loving of the Earth. It's kind of like Wikipedia in print form, way back in the day of catalogs. But the point is, there's a love of life that you feel immediately. The second thing that happened was I started putting seeds in the ground, and they actually came up. And I realized this is incredible. And no, I am not on drugs, and I do not do drugs. But honestly, being alive is just such a trip that you can actually put something, a little seed in the ground, and within a few days you have this green, beautiful creature growing in your garden that will then feed you. I say this just because Kevin Kelly, Stewart Brand, they have a lot to do with technology, with the trajectory of technology, with words like futurism and all of this. But at the heart of their work, and there's so much rich work involved with them, there's such a love of life and of community and of helping people. And I feel like a lot of the people currently leading us, so to speak, in the technological world once had that same spirit. And I wonder if they still do. I wonder if Gen Alpha, Gen Beta can feel that spirit, and if the young Kevin Kellys and Stewart Brands of the world right now are out there in love with life in the way these guys were and still are. I'll just leave that as a question because it feels like it's very related to ideas of other conversations, like, do we love the world enough to take responsibility for it? Are we blind to the beauty and incredible, existence that we're part of? I hope not. I know we're not. I know we can find this again. It's in us. It is us. And yeah, I'm just going to put that out there today off the top of my head. Kevin Kelly is amazing. His work is amazing. It's always been about the humanity, the life, the connection, the growth, the opportunity, the positive, the optimism. I really appreciate that a lot, and I hope you'll go listen to some of his talks about optimism and think about Kevin and think about Stewart and think about these days when all of this was just beginning. The internet was a new country, and think about where we are now and what new country is before us and where we want to orient, what we want to explore, and of course, where the love is in all that, because it does matter. Oh, okay. Well, let's get started. Okay. Hi, Kevin. It's so wonderful to have you here. It's a real honor that you're on Love and Philosophy. Thank you.
You're really, really welcome, and I am really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, we're going to talk about your book was Excellent Advice for Living, but before we get into that, I wonder if we could talk about your living a little bit, your life itself, to what I think might have been the first time you saw a computer.
Mm,
I think it was with your dad when you were a teenager.
yeah,
And yeah, so where were you and what was that experience like?
yeah. It was in the '60s. I was estimating that might have been around 65. My dad was involved with computers at the very, very beginning of the beginning computers because he was using them originally. His degree was in meteorology, weather forecasting, and the weather forecasters were some of the first civilian use of computers, and that's where he had the experience in the army. And he was not a programmer, but he was what we would call today more like an IT person. And he was very enthusiastic about them, and he showed me all kind of books about it, and it never registered. I had no real interest in them, but he did want to take me to a computer show in Atlantic City. He thought it would be kind of cool, and so I went along, and I was totally bored. It was just there were just big cabinets. It's like furniture. There was no screens. There was no keyboards. You couldn't talk to them. You had to have the punch cards. You had trays of punch cards that you give in, and then they would have tape machines, and then they would have a typewriter, and that was the output. It was just a typewriter. You couldn't even make pictures. Not really. And so it was like, I'm not interested in this at all. I know what computers are. I read science fiction. I know what computers
Ah,
are.
so you were reading science
Oh,
fiction.
I
I
was
was going to
totally
ask
into
you.
science
Okay,
fiction. It's like I know what computers are. These are not computers.
that's wonderful. That's great. I loved it that you said you were bored, but that's even a better statement that
Yeah. No,
you
I
had
was
something else in your imagination.
underwhelming. Not because it was just like they're not computers you interact with. They're AIs. You can do stuff. I can't do anything here. So
So
yeah.
you were already thinking about all that
Oh
in a
yeah. I
young
was a
age. You
total science fiction buff at that time because this was before there was any science fiction on movies. So there was no science fiction movies until 2001, and
the
this was
movie
the future.
2001, not the year.
I'm at the movie,
Yeah, I know. Just for in case someone didn't know.
and and so like a lot of kids, we didn't really have TV in the beginning, and so reading science fiction was my entertainment, and I was really into it, and so I had a sense of the future from the science fiction. I had a sense of where we were going to go and what was really the cool stuff, and it was not it was not these cabinets.
It was not a room full of
No,
weird cabinets with no
right?
visuals. That's so interesting because a lot of people I've talked to who end up sort of having a good vision of the future or a vision of the future that ends up playing out, as you definitely have, did read science fiction when they were
Oh
young.
yeah,
Do you
oh
think
yeah.
it influenced your imagination in
Absolutely,
the way? Yeah.
absolutely, 100%. And I think if there was more, what's the word I want? More transparency in scientific literature, if people were required to cite the science fiction influence on there when they were doing research, we would discover the incredible role that science fiction has played in directing people's own research. I mean, the route from the Star Trek communicator to the iPhone is pretty direct. Everybody had that vision of what it was that they were trying to make because of Star Trek and that bit of optimism. It was very influential, and even things like I was involved in the Minority Report stuff of you know gesture computing and all these things. They form an image in our mind that becomes a guide a guide star.
It's fascinating. It also makes me think that you've said that maybe the real computers or the real internet started when it might have been when you were at University of Georgia, I'm not sure because we were just talking about that,
Yeah,
but when telephones and computers met. And was that when you started to get that sense of what you'd
yeah,
imagined as a kid could be
yeah,
possible?
yeah.
Yeah.
So even personal computers, when they came along, still were not that interesting to me. I mean, they kind of made typing easier. I wasn't into spreadsheets in the beginning, so it was a little bit of typing maybe, but it really wasn't until computers married the telephone and you were connecting them together that for me that was the aha. That was like, I see what this is. This is a technology that I can use. This is technology that seems very human. This is a technology that seems more Amish than, big steam shovels or even big skyscrapers and the kind of thing we had in mind about technology, what that meant before computers came along. So I had very little interest in technology until then. But once this communication version came along, the internet, it was like, this is powerful. This is humanizing. This is our destiny, our direction. And so I switched into thinking more about what that might do for us.
What was it that was humanizing? It's hard for me to imagine how that suddenly felt humanizing. Was it the complexity of it, the connection, the
Well, because
relation?
you're connecting other humans. It's like,
Uh-huh.
because instead of being isolated, it was bringing humans together. It was communities. I mean, that was the thing. I mean, all these bulletin boards set up in kids' basements and bedrooms, and you would go in and you would be leaving messages, and someone else would come in, and it was like you were connecting to people. It was weirdly exhilarating because these are people that they were conceptual neighbors. They weren't your actual neighbors, but they were neighbors in what you were interested in. And that was, you're in a town where nobody was interested in what you're interested in, and suddenly you're connected to someone who's interested in what you're interested in. That's human. That's
That must
amazing.
have
And
been
then and
exciting
and
too.
then you're producing information that you were looking for that didn't exist or you couldn't find, and they're helping you find it. It's like, yeah. And there was, again, the informational aspect of it, with finding, and this was the whole Earth catalog agenda that I was on, of like trying to provide information that was hard to find, that you couldn't find anywhere else, and being available in that kind of a way, that having access to it, that's also very human, because you have someone who's looking how to do something and you help them do it. That's a very human emotion, a human quality of helping people accomplish things. So
Yeah.
so so that's why I said it felt sort of Amish.
And that speaks to enthusiasm comes up a lot in
Yeah,
the advice for living and curiosity and connection and
yeah.
so that speaks to that a lot. But you mentioned the whole Earth catalog,
Mhm.
Stewart Brand. When did you meet Stewart Brand, and when did you was that your first job, or how does that relate to those two moments, the
Yeah,
13-year
yeah.
old and then the
So
person who
I
became obsessed with
encountered
computers?
the Whole Earth catalog at the end of high school,
Oh, so early! Wow.
and it blew my mind. It was again the perfect convergence for me, because the things that Stewart was interested in, I was interested in the same kinds of things, but I was doing it like completely isolated, alone. I was imagining like trying to build a house where you never threw anything away, that was completely like recyclable. This is like, again, in the 60s, way before, and who else,
Well,
nobody else was talking about that.
no.
Like, I was trying to make these designs and stuff
You were thinking of that when you were in high school?
before high school. Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah, in middle school. And I would sending away for catalogs. I discovered that you could send away to get these catalogs. It was the only way to kind of find out stuff. And so I had this thing of trying to discover as many catalogs as I could. So here suddenly comes along the Whole Earth catalog, which is like doing that magnified by a million times. They're interested in art and systems and all kinds of stuff that I was. And it was like, this was written for me. And I wanted to contribute to it, because the model of the Whole Earth catalog was a reader written, reader supported, ad free mechanism. It was like Substack. It was user generated content and a user supported subscription base. And the idea was like, people would discover something, they would send it in, they would send their blog in, their review, the editors would evaluate it and then publish it. And it was like the internet before the internet opened. And
Yeah.
so that would immediately appeal to me. And I decided that the only place I ever wanted to work was at Whole Earth, but I had nothing to offer them. But I started to try and submit things reviews of stuff that I kind of discovered, and Stewart kept rejecting them. He would send a nice thing. No, I don't think that, whatever. So I never made much headway. Um, but eventually, after my travels, for years and years of traveling, I would still read what they were writing. I was subscribed to the catalog, and I read cover to cover. After traveling for years, I discovered that I knew something about budget travel that nobody else knew. And so I started reviewing these little known, self published books that Americans didn't know about or nobody knew about. There was this book called Southeast Asia on a Shoestring by Tony and Maureen Wheeler, and they were called Lonely Planet.
Oh.
Okay. So they had a little self-published thing, and I started reviewing their stuff. And then there was another guy named Europe through the back door, and his name was Rick Steves. And I was reviewing his stuff and saying, hey, this is really cool stuff. And later on, I started a business where I was importing those books into America and distributing them. There was another guy named Bill Doughton who had the Moon publications, and so I started to have something to offer, and I started to do the travel part for Whole Earth as a freelance writer, and so I was when the internet came along, I decided that I wanted to report on it as if it was a new country, as if I was a travel writer and this was a new country. So I talked my way into the editors at Horth to give me access to the new experimental online systems that they were meeting on. And that also just elevated because it wasn't just a bulletin board, it was the bulletin board with threads and you could be on this all at the same time. And that was like, oh, wow. And so this was a new country. So I was writing the stuff about this was a new continent and I was learning how to type. I just didn't know how to type. And my writing style is very telegraphic, and it turned out to be perfect for the online text systems because I'm very short and telegraphic. And so they offered me a job based on what I was writing online, and I claimed to be the first person hired online in 83, 84.
Well,
Um, so I went out to meet Stewart. So I met him kind of online primarily, and he met me online primarily.
fascinating that you two came together because you both feel like people who've been at the
Wow.
sort of growing tip of everything, both of you. I mean, even in what you just described with finding Lonely Planet and
Right,
and these
right.
sorts of things. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah.
ever frustrating, or is
What's
that
frustrating?
always being
Oh,
so
it's a
kind of
friend?
ahead?
No, it's sort of a job, and it's. I mean that is one of Stewart's great strengths. He had a good nose for a frontier that was potent, for
Absolutely.
frontiers that he was always there at the front. But we both did. Like we were very early Burning Man attendees. I was one among the first. My kids were the first kids at Burning Man. Yeah, my
Whoa.
two girls, I took them. It was totally crazy. Oh my gosh.
Do they remember it? Were they old enough that
Oh
they?
yeah, yeah. We were
Oh
shipping them
wow.
back, and they were there for a while. They were the only kids there. But so yes, so I think it's a practice. I think this is a noticing um, of emerging something emerging, and I think the qualities that I would look for are like are new words being invented. Is this a area where there's new language being invented? The early crypto was like I actually had a book chapter on crypto in my first book,
I
'94.
know, out of control. I was gonna
And
ask
so I
you.
had
Is
an
that
e-money,
the
the
one?
e-money, the e-money chapter
Yeah.
was about crypto, but it wasn't blockchain. And that became I assigned Stephen Levy to the very second issue of Wired, and he went on to write a whole book. But because when I went to visit these guys who were doing it, there was like there was new language, there was new concepts, there was people using their free time to do it. Like Mark Andreessen and other people say, they often like to invest in what founders do for fun. How do they spend your time when you're not working? That's another kind of thing you're looking at. It's like where's your passion time being invested into? That's often where a frontier might be happening. And so Stewart had a really good nose, and I learned to have a pretty good nose as well in kind of, and then giving yourself permission to hang out there and um, see, maybe even report on what's happening, and that continues today. And it's to me, I see it as my job.
It also connects to a lot of the advice, I think, because there's a sense of cultivating awareness in a way. I don't know, you
Yep.
never say it like that, but
Right.
and I was wondering as you were just saying that if part did you have to learn how to be patient a bit too and
No, I think I'm
persist or
naturally patient.
okay.
Doing photography, the kind of photography I was doing was incredibly patient. It's funny because I don't have patience for other things like fishing. Never appealed to me. It's like that just seems like an incredible waste of patience. But I have patience in photography where I will spend hours waiting for something to happen. I would say this situation is pregnant
Mm.
with an interesting picture, and I'm going to spend my time here waiting for it to align. And so I have patience. I have a natural patience for the right things or the things that I'm interested in.
That's
Um,
actually very beautiful. That sounds to me, if one were to look at your career, probably not from your perspective, but
yeah,
from my perspective, it seems like you were doing that a bit. For example, all of the stuff you were doing online was at a time when people didn't really think the internet was going to
right,
be anything. And to me, that seems like almost patience that you stayed with it. And
yeah,
then, and a lot of things that I've heard you say, when you say them, when I look back, I think people probably thought, no way. And then over time, it
yeah.
does align. You could see that there was something there worth waiting for.
Yeah. And there is an active imagination where you can imagine it getting better or better than it is. Other times you're wrong about it. I mean I've been plenty wrong. Like when eBay came along, I was like, I don't think so. I don't think this is like I don't think this is going to work. But I was totally wrong about it. And so I just didn't have the imagination to see what it could what it could do. Um, and so I think having an active imagination is also very helpful.
Yeah, you also have some good advice for how to be wrong
Right.
and why being wrong is important, which is something I think we all need to hear right now in this world.
Right.
Admitting your mistakes and that's actually a healthy thing and a way to grow. That's part of your book. But you mentioned travel, and I wonder what that seems like a very important thread in your life. And
Mhm.
what was that initial travel about? And has that helped you to see landscapes differently and these other themes we've been talking about already?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with a father who was a little bit of a workaholic, but he didn't believe in vacations. So we took very few family vacations, very few. And I didn't have any money. I'd never really been out of New Jersey very much. I didn't have a car. Um, and so when I did start to travel, it was mind blowing. And it was a very severe jump from suburban, parochial New Jersey to Taiwan, Hong Kong, Japan. And I'd never eaten Chinese food in my life. I'd never held chopsticks in my life. There weren't any Chinese Orientals in my life. It was so parochial, and then just being kind of thrust into this other world, and at a time when it was still a lot of the old world happening, was the best university, the best uh, wake up call ever, and it became my college where every day I'm learning new things and changing my mind and having these aha moments, as well as trying to capture stuff with my camera. And so I kept traveling seriously after that forever. Even I took a slight break for a while, when I started to have my family, and I was trying to start a kind of a real career when I was 35. And so there was a small break, but then I tried to take my family on interesting family vacations. We went to Bali when it was still pretty early with my family, and went into the hinterlands of Bali. But I came to view the benefits of travel as so important, particularly for young people, that I am totally in favor of subsidizing young people to travel. I think as a nation we should do that. I mean, I would go so far as I think we should have mandatory, I'm talking about as American, mandatory service, national service for 2 years, no matter who you are, you handicapped, whatever it is, you have national service, and you can do things like go to Peace Corps or whatever. You want to go to the military, you can do public service at home, but travel would be one of the options. Travel meaning like you're going abroad, you're being funded, and I think that would transform America of having more and more people go outside of their culture and come back and look at themselves from outside. And among the many other values that you get from traveling, I think that would be transformative. And so, the Mormons do a great job with their 2 year abroad, and that I think is just hugely benefit their communities and those and in Mormons and what they do. There was only men for a while. I think they've changed it recently to have women go 2 years out as well. But that is so important when you're young to get that orientation of stepping outside of what everybody assumes. All the assumptions, you can kind of see the assumptions that your own culture is sitting on. They become a little bit more visible, and you get to think about it and question and see alternatives and change your mind about things because of travel.
Yeah, absolutely. And another word that comes up a lot in your book is habit. And some of the book feels like you've been cultivating ways to catch yourself or ways to do what travel does to turn your perspective a
Yeah.
little. I
Hmm.
think that relates to your complexity book a bit too. And I
Hmm.
did the Peace Corps, and I
Oh,
traveled
where
early.
were
Yeah,
you?
yeah. And so
Yeah.
I know very well what you're saying there. It
Yeah.
really does. The world becomes a kaleidoscope in a way, or the way that you talk about thinking a lot, in terms of all of
Right.
these themes, and you learn how to switch your thinking a bit, don't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I'm just curious where you were stationed for the Peace
I
Corps.
went to Mongolia.
Oh,
Yeah. My dog is from there. She's here. You
oh
can't see
my
her, but she
gosh.
just barked. Sorry about that, but yeah.
Mongolia. Where in
Mhm.
Mongolia were you stationed?
I was in different places because I did a sort of I had to do a travel through, but I was mostly in Choibalsan, so
Okay.
and Ulaanbaatar for a bit,
Yeah.
but
Uh-huh.
yeah, and then over near Kazakhstan, but mostly
Yeah.
Choibalsan.
On the yeah. No, I had a fabulous time in Mongolia.
Hmm.
It was just it was well anyway. Well, we won't talk about Mongolia now. But yes, I
Yeah, we could
understand.
talk about that for hours, so.
I understand. Uh,
But, yeah, the point was, I guess, that it helps you understand. I think similar to the way reading does when you're a kid.
mhm.
Reading science fiction,
Yeah.
you can switch into different mindsets, and for me, and I kinda heard you saying it a bit, when you're traveling, you start to realize you can yeah, there's different ways of perceiving. Is that
Yeah. I mean, that's just the fundamental one, but there's, I mean, I think we can make a long list of all the other habits, all the insights that you get from traveling, from learning a language if you need to, and how that changes your mind, to just learning social skills. Yeah, there's so many things. So anyway, I would be totally in favor of having programs where youth are subsidized to travel in some
we
capacity.
yeah, me too. I totally support that.
Yeah.
It is one of those hard things that you can't explain. I mean, you only know it once you do it too, and that's why it
Right.
can be hard to just yeah. But you said something about you when you were in your 30s, were going to start a real job or something like
Yes.
this, and that
Yes.
reminded me of one of your pieces of advice. I'm probably not going to get it exactly right, but don't try to be the best, be the only.
Hmm.
And did you live into that advice?
Well,
Mm.
the subtitle of my book is "Advice I Wish I'd Known Earlier." So, no, I didn't know that at the time. I wish I had. Um, that came much later, even in writing the book, when I kind of part of writing the book, I write in order to find out what I think.
Mm.
And so, what the book did was help me clarify some of my own ideas that I had but hadn't been able to say. Um, but I wasn't on the program to try and find my only. I only understood that fairly late in life that power, and but I was absolutely on the road to the only. I just didn't know it. I mean, I was like, I've always had a lot of confidence about kind of doing things my own way and not really caring about whether other people, because I also was expecting to be poor all my life, and I was making a trade for having control of my time, even as a young person. That's what I was signing up for. It's like I know that I won't have a career and I won't have money, but I'm going to have time to do these cool things that I want to do, and I'm happy with that thing because I understood for some reason, and travel actually helped part of that. I understood that time was more valuable than money, and I had an encounter in Nepal where I was trekking. I spent months trekking by myself without a porter, just with my backpack through you know, on the treks. And I met, there was some organized, this was in the 70s when there were some organized treks with many porters carrying their tents. It's the rich people who were doing these tours. And there was a guy, older man, who was obviously very wealthy, just because these were very expensive things. And we were mingling at some place or other where they were camped out, where I was sleeping in a tea house on the floor, and he was commiserating with me, hearing where I was going, what I was doing. He was saying, "I'm so envious of you because you have all this time to see all these things, and
Mm.
I don't." And it was like, aha, here's the rich guy saying that I was wealthier than he was, and I realized I was, and so there was this sort of shift in understanding that time wealth was much more valuable than money wealth, and so that I was constantly leaning into this idea of seeing my time as my wealth and not
I
the
can
money.
really understand that. That's a I had a similar feeling.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, but I said live into. I probably didn't say it clearly, but that living into not trying to be the best, but be the only. I feel like because to go back to that, you said you were starting a real job at 35. I mean,
Right,
maybe
right.
we can say what you meant about that, but by kind of whatever traditional standards, at least there's a sort of pressure to do certain things within a
Yeah, yeah,
certain time. And that mindset you were cultivating is not, it's very different from that.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
When I was 35, I got married and I decided to have a family. And so then you kind of have to think about um, a regular income. So I worked at Whole Earth. I was getting $10 an hour at the nonprofit. And that was that was my job. It was like a $10 an hour at a nonprofit. Okay,
But it worked. It was,
and my wife, to her credit, married me. She was way overeducated. She was making a lot more money than I was. But it's kind of a mystery why, because I had, no college degree. And if
well, this is love and philosophy, so love is powerful.
yeah, so but again, I was signed up for um, a different route where again I wanted to maintain control, and so I had a lot of control of my time at Whole Earth. Um, I mean, I was kind of running the stuff, and I was the publisher and editor, and so I, I had a fair amount of control over where I worked and when I worked, and I worked a lot, but I could take time off if I needed to.
And you were cultivating all these skills that actually were going to come in handy.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
Yeah, but you didn't know that. But
Yeah,
how did that switch? Like maybe I'm thinking about your first book, Out of Control. How did
yeah.
we get there? And like also I think you were writing that was the first one, right?
That
Out
was the
of
first
Control.
one.
Yeah.
Um,
That was in the 90s, I guess.
this was in the 90s. So I was already online, and like around 1998, there was this embryonic. So I was involved in starting the Well, which was the first public access.
Oh,
So I was on the internet,
that
and
was
there
with
was
Stewart too?
yeah, it was with Stewart too.
Okay.
And so there was a thing that came over the internet, which was this announcement that this guy was going to start have a conference called Artificial Life, and he just basically said if you're doing artificial life, come to this. It was in Los Alamos,
Oh wow.
and it was like I'd never been to a scientific conference before. I thought artificial life, man, that is so cool. I don't have anything, but I want to go and attend. And I'd never been to a conference. I didn't have any money, but I remember it. So it was a very small fee, like $100 or something. And I was camping in a state park because they didn't have enough money for the hotel in Los Angeles, which was pretty high up and cold. And so I was attending this conference, and I decided to do a summary of every talk and post it onto the internet, onto the well. And so it was like the first like real time conference reporting.
Oh, cool.
And so I did a summary of every talk. There were, I don't know, maybe 60 talks over the conference. And each one was kind of blowing my mind. And I was trying to report and understand it and did this little summary that I would post every night. And that, for the tiny little internet at the time, it went kind of viral into the internet.
Wow.
And
That
so
sounds wonderful. Does that still exist by any chance?
I
I
don't
would love to read that.
know. Oh, it's on the well. It must be somewhere on the well.
Later. Yeah.
I never thought about that. It must be
Must
out there.
yeah.
Um, I didn't take it down. I don't, yeah. So that, based on the reaction of that, I thought there's something here. I'd like to do kind of a book on artificial life and all these connections. And
Mm.
because what it was there were economists, there were computer scientists, there were biologists, there were all these people talking about the same kind of thing that later on would come to be like the Santa Fe Institute and complexity stuff.
I was just about to say complexity. That's what the book is. Yeah,
That
and Santa Fe.
that's what it
So
was.
that was the beginning, huh?
That was the beginning. And there was there was one other journalist there, and that was James Glick.
Oh wow! So there you go.
Yeah, so
Chaos.
he and I were attending. He was just a little ahead of me, and in terms of writing ability and all these other things. So so there was something happening, and I came back and I said I think I should I'd like to write a book about this. So I had this agent at Whole Earth that I was doing books with, and I pitched him a book, and it got accepted. And then I was in a problem because I'm running a magazine. So I took a sabbatical from Whole Earth to write the book, which was a big step because, it was not very much money. So I'm kind of, you know, um, taking a risk there. I just got a job and now I'm taking a sabbatical from the job, unpaid sabbatical. And
Hmm.
while I was finishing the book, which took longer than I thought, that's when Wired came along. So that's a very complicated story. But the idea, yeah. What happened though was that I agreed to start editing Wired, but I said I'm going to have to take a sabbatical after the first couple issues to finish my book. So I was taking a sabbatical within the sabbatical. When I started
Okay.
Wire, I let Whole Earth know that. Look,
Nested sabbaticals. That's very complex
when are we going to come
systemy,
back? Well, the
systemsy.
whole idea was that this was a book that kept being delayed, and so the book finally came out, and the book also, while I was writing the book, the chapters that I was writing became the early issues of Wired. So, like as I said,
Ah,
one of the
that's
chapters of
yeah.
the book was on e-money, so I assigned Stephen to write a whole bunch on e-money. And the first issue of Wired was Bruce Sterling, and I had written a chapter on God games and simulations, and I had Bruce go take my contacts and write the story for Wired. So I was using the early my book, the research that I had done, and the frontiers that I was exploring. I used that to shape the first issues of Wired. So it was useful in terms of what I was doing.
That's so interesting too, because just even if you look at the table of contents of that book, it's like the next 50 years of
Yeah,
topics that will be
right,
discussed.
right,
So,
right.
it's kind of wonderful, isn't it, that you actually that
Yeah,
all that came together in that moment. I guess it's no coincidence, but
yeah, yeah. There was actually a chapter on economies that I never got to write. It was too big as it was. But yes, it was all there, and it worked out in the end with Wired. So I only missed a couple issues, and then went back. Um, and so I learned a lot about writing a book, which is that the first, the last 90% takes longer than the first 90%. And so they're just never ending. You have to abandon books. At least that's my experience. You don't actually finish them, you just abandon them.
yeah, or sometimes I just think of it as like mini all one sort of book and you just have,
Right, right.
you let one book go, but then you continue the subjects elsewhere.
Exactly.
But that kind of relates to the way that book begins and the orientation of that book about what's between being what's born and what's made. How do you say it? The marriage
The
between
world, yeah, the world they're born, the world they made, yeah, the marriage, yeah.
yeah,
That, it's that is still, um, what's the word I want? That's still I'm still writing about that. Yes.
yeah, and the technological, the biological.
Right.
That actually I hadn't thought of it till you said it, but you could almost blurb Wired magazine's edge or what was
Right,
different
right,
about
right,
it
right.
with that, couldn't you?
Part of it was, and also part of it was optimism.
Yeah, the
Um,
optimism too.
that was another part of the secret sauce. And then the other genius that was not my idea, and that was entirely due to Louis Rosetta, the founder, the co-founder of Wired. He I was at Whole Earth. I was running the magazine with what I call conceptual news, which was new concepts, new stuff. And Lewis said, "That's interesting, but that's not mainstream. What we want to do is we want to wrap it around the people. We want to make the geeks the heroes. We want to
Hmm.
talk about the people who are making this stuff and what their dreams are. And so we don't going to have technology on the cover. We're going to have people, faces on the cover. And that was the brilliance of Lewis and the reason why Wired worked. And the difference between, I was doing the same thing at Whole Earth and it had an audience of 40,000 people at the peak with no ads. And Lewis, doing the same thing, the same kind of concepts, but at Wired now we suddenly have the audience of millions, and we're at the center of the whole conversation. And so that was because of Lewis's instinct that you wanted to be talking about the people who were doing it.
Yeah. But I can also see how it fits very well with even what we've been talking about, the trajectories of the science fiction or, that marriage of technological and biological and seeing the world in different perspectives. And so it seems like it was a good meeting of minds, so to speak.
Oh yeah, absolutely, for sure, for sure.
I want to move towards the book a bit before we leave. And or to me, these two books actually feel very close though. I don't know
Which
if
the
Out of Control,
advice
the one we're
out of
talking about,
control,
and the
all right?
last one, Excellent Advice for
Okay.
Living.
Oh, that's
Because
interesting. You have to explain that.
well, I think it has to do with, it would take me too long, but the complexity and also that idea of marriage between what is born and made. And this, I feel like you've from the beginning had a lot of different this multiplicity or this kaleidoscopic vision that I'm just trying to describe can be very hard to communicate, right?
Mhm.
Or to kind of
Yeah,
make into something sustainable and real.
right.
And if you look at advice, excellent advice for living, to me, it seems like the way you've been able to find habits to do that better, to clarify and communicate better, to be a better person without losing the complexity. I don't know if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's there's a lot of nuance in the book, and I would say Out of Control was fairly nuanced because it was not binary. I think there's very few things in the world that are binary. Most are continuums, and that's part of the whole message of Out of Control, which was that there's a continuum between the most biological thing and the most mechanical thing. That they're actually just one long, one long continuous thing that have different faces. And so I think there is a lot of that kind of non-binariness in the book. Um,
Exactly. That's exactly what I was moving towards because a
right,
lot of this is about trying to hold dichotomies or binaries, which
right,
doesn't mean you collapse them. It
right.
means you explore the space around them. You let them be what they are. And
Sure.
when you explore the space around them, suddenly you see the multiplicities. They're not actually
Right,
binaries. And you
right,
talk about that in the book in a way, right? And this paradoxical nature of life,
right.
of how do you say it, that we're shaping what shapes us,
Yeah,
or we create what creates us, or something like this.
right,
What is that
exactly.
paradox that you bring out?
Yeah. And my own personal theology right now is that the origin of the universe rests on necessary paradoxes, inescapable paradoxes to our what we would to our minds call paradoxes, which is like the the origin of the universe in any story you want to tell is just unacceptably illogical, right? I mean, it's like, well, there's God. Well, where did God come from? Always was, whatever, self-created. It's not going to parse. And the same thing with free will and determinism. Yeah, they're both there. They're both
Absolutely.
operating at the same time, and it doesn't make any sense, but that's what it is. It's kind of like superpositions. God's a superposition, right? It's God, not God at the same time. And so there's fundamental paradoxes, which I'm become much more comfortable with, and little, I like even quotes and statements that contain a little bit of that kind of paradoxical quality. And so I'm pretty so some of the fundamental mysteries are paradoxical, and I am much more comfortable with those than ever before.
I think it's a skill we really, really need right now. Be being able to hold paradox. I'm actually very serious, and for the reason that I also think everyone needs to read your book right now because like everything, nothing makes sense right now. You can't reconcile everything together.
Right, right,
And part of being able to make sense of it in this paradoxical way that you describe in that book, I think, is learning that you have to hold the
right.
space, not try to reconcile everything.
Yeah.
And I feel like some of the advice you're giving is
Uh-huh.
ways of doing that. And also, I brought up awareness earlier, right? And
Yeah.
this
Uh-huh.
taking a minute to notice the space. Yeah.
Right. Noticing, yeah, there was noticing is someone was oh I think I subscribe to this Rob Walker's little newsletter on noticing. So he's big on
Oh, I
noticing
write that down.
and different ways of noticing. And one of the things I think he was saying was this idea that a lot of people's creativity and tremendous work and innovation and discovery and good stuff comes from the fact that they noticed something and decided that rather than it being unimportant, that it was very important. And there's a sense in which through childhood and beyond, we're often taught to dismiss the stuff we notice as unimportant. And he said that the people who kind of retain the seriousness of the stuff that they noticed, whether this tiniest little thing is saying that's really important, and making something out of that tiny noticing. You notice it, you give it attention. As you give it attention, you find it more interesting. And so it's kind of like and what you've learned, or at least I have learned, is that you can start with the tiniest little thing, and if you take it seriously, it can become something big and huge and interesting to other people. If so, you don't want to lose that ability to not just notice things, but to take it seriously as well.
Yeah. That's another thing in the book. You talk about small steps or
Right, right,
this thinking small, but not thinking in a small way, but
right.
noticing the small things. And I've also noticed that even some of the things from your book where you, because sometimes things that seem obvious to you, if you notice them, you realize they're not obvious to everyone else.
Right, right.
Some of your life, maybe it has been like that. Things
Yeah,
that maybe you just noticed that you knew that other people didn't know.
exactly right. And 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 not to dismiss them as being, well, that's not really important.
Yeah.
That's not
Or because no one else notices it must be
right,
wrong or something.
right,
That's
right.
not
So,
true.
but you say, no, I think there's something there. I think, and even if there isn't, I'll make something there. And so, I mean, like Jerry Seinfeld's entire humor is in noticing little tiny things and making a big thing about taking them seriously. And so,
Absolutely.
writers can do the same thing where they notice something and they turn it into the world, and that's a beautiful thing that I think we do as children a bit and are kind of educated out of it. Um,
Yeah.
and so I like the idea of trying to return to your childlike fascination with things and kind of
Well,
using that as a guide.
and that's where the enthusiasm is too. Enthusiasm is also a big word in your book. And it
Yeah,
reminded me of that quote, enthusiasm is the supernatural serenity, which I've always loved by Thoreau. And that, the way you describe kids, that's kind of what you have as a kid. You know, you can look at a
right,
little flower or whatever it is, and there's a whole
right,
world that opens up.
right,
And I think we don't realize that's actually the case all the time still.
right,
In the way that you said, if you look at something
right,
with a certain awareness long enough, it opens
right,
up.
right.
And the book you wrote, a lot of these little things are like that, aren't they? They're sort of these distilled little cones or
Hmm.
tweets. I don't, tweet is gone now, but you know what I mean. These things where
Hmm.
they look small, but you could kind of unpack them for a long time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's oh well, yeah. That's exactly right. In fact, I did a version, a prototype, because I'm big into doing prototypes of things.
Yeah. I saw that on your when you make all the things that you did the
Yeah, so
little
I made a little
prototype.
prototype book,
Yeah, that's cool. Oh wow.
and it was called Seeds for Contemplation.
Oh wow. That's
The
beautiful
idea
actually.
and it has my little doodles in which the publishers said was too homespun.
Oh
I
no.
know, I
Wow,
know,
you, that looks very special.
I
Should
know,
be a
and
re-release.
um, but the idea was that these things were little seeds that you would unpack,
Okay. Oh well,
um,
there.
right
That's
there. So,
wonderful.
um, yeah. So prototyping is the way to go. You want to try things out in small steps and
Like the
learn as you
fairy
go.
door. It reminded me of the fairy door that you made.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
or you did it
Just
on cardboard first. But,
all the
um,
time. Yeah.
but another important thing in the book, I think, and one thing that's cultivating this thinking paradoxically or being able to hold the space does is I have to bring up love, but I think it's in the book a lot.
Hmm.
It helps you be able to be responsible,
Hmm.
to say when something is wrong, to not take yourself so seriously, to not get
Hmm.
caught up in all the optics that seem so flashy and wonderful, but actually kind of make
Yeah.
you miserable, you know,
Right.
no matter how much money you have. And all of this feels very important to me today. I don't know about to you, but
Hmm.
um, the one thing, for example, that you say, if you're not becoming more responsible, you're not growing or something like that.
Yeah. Right.
Um,
If you don't feel you have more responsibility, then you're probably not growing. Um, I'm a big believer in process and growth. And if you have growth, you
Protopia.
have process. You have process, you have growth. And even my own personal theology is that God itself is also in a process, and we're part of it having its own understanding about what it's doing. And so, um, process and moving. that's one of the constant things in the stuff I talk about is this idea of progress, of movement, of growth over time. And so I have a very process view of the world, of our own nature, of the nature of everything, this sort of evolutionary movement of betterment, ideally, and so yeah, so that's just kind of my bias, and
Well,
maybe
it reminded me when you talked about the internet as a landscape or something.
yeah,
To me, I feel that movement. It's part of the philosophy I do is
right,
thinking of even thinking itself as an exploration of a
sure,
landscape. And
absolutely,
yeah, and I
and
feel that a lot in your work, that you were already working from that place, maybe even
right,
very young.
the there's a conceptual idea of landscapes that is really popular in computer science and biology, which is this a landscape is a way of mapping the path, the process of an organization or organism or an individual, and the idea that the higher it goes, the more perfected, more optimized it is, and that what you're kind of always climbing the hill, so they call it hill climbing.
Hmm.
So you want to be always climbing up the hill towards optimization. And if you're designing something, you want to kind of optimize it, and you're kind of there are algorithms and methods to kind of make sure you're always climbing the hill. So they call it gradient descent, where you are actually going up the gradients all the time, trying to optimize something. And the issue is that when you get to the peak, if it's if the peak may not be the peak may be a local optima. There may be higher peaks, more optimization on a different peak. But to get there, you have to kind of go back down, and that's really hard if you have an organization built for excellence and optimization. To go back down to where it's less optimal is very, very difficult. But the thing I wanted to talk about was this other peak. Like you could be optimizing elevated optimized typewriters, and they got stuck there because in word processors there was a bigger mountain and they couldn't get off of that. You have to kind of go down. That's why the startups have an advantage because they have nothing to lose. They're not pursuing excellence. It's all very, very low margins there. But the important thing is that to have the greatest effect in the world, you don't want to be hill climbing, you want to be hill making. You want to make a new territory. You want to create
Mm.
the new continent. You want to make the new mountain that can be hill climbed. And so this idea of hill making versus hill climbing is where I think the greatest rewards are. And if you personally are trying to do something, rather than trying to optimize what we already have, you want to kind of be on the frontier and making a new territory. Andrea, it's been
That's
great.
beautiful. I know you need
Move
to go.
on.
You don't have
And
anything to say about love by any chance at the very
oh,
end?
I love love.
Okay, that's all we need.
Okay.
Thank
We'll
you,
continue the
Kevin. This was
conversation
wonderful.
someday.
Yes, please.
Okay.
I'll talk to you
Thank you.
soon. Thank you so much for your time.
I enjoyed it. I love your spirit.
I,
She
I
loves
I have so much I love about your work.
you. Oh,
All
well,
right.
thank you.
Till another time then.
All
Bye.
right.